what if I had made a false statement to an investigator on your team? Could I go to jail for up to 5 years?
Yes.
Yes.
Although it's Congress, so.
The rare moment of levity today. Joining our conversation from the Washington Post, national political reporter Robert Costa. Robert Costa, your take on the day.
In just a few minutes, Speaker Pelosi will hold a news conference at the Capitol with Chairman Schiff and Chairman Nadler. Decisions have to be made now by Democrats how to proceed. I spent all day at the Capitol talking to lawmakers on both sides. Spoke to Senator Tester of Montana, a moderate Democrat. He's just not sure at this point if it makes political sense for Democrats to move forward because Republicans control the Senate. He said it would be a futile endeavor. At the same time, so much pressure because of what Mr. Mueller said from many centrist and leftist Democrats to not only impeach the president, but at least begin impeachment proceedings.
And what are you hearing in terms of the moments that broke through? What do members expect to make it onto their local newscasts? Because a lot of the sense in just watching it in real time was that it was really that second hearing before the House Intel Committee where the questions were more focused on what the Russians did and the Trump campaign's enthusiasm for their assistance that broke through and brought out and elicited the best answers from Robert Mueller.
That's the consensus among many of my Democratic sources at the Capitol. They said they were hoping the House Judiciary Committee would do more to build an obstruction case by having Mr. Mueller illustrate the case, but they felt that Chairman Schiff was effective in underscoring how interference is still happening. They hope at the least this will spark momentum for some kind of action in the Senate and the House on election security.
And what was the review? What were the reviews like for not just the performance aspects of the special counsel's day of testimony, but sort of from the morning where there was a lot of reluctance to wrap both arms around the specifics. He refused to read from the obstruction volume, had members read it to him, did a lot of looking for the exact passages so he didn't deviate. In the afternoon, a dam seemed to break. He talked about the criminality around the WikiLeaks involvement. He talked more openly with Congressman Schiff about foreign interference. He spoke to Democrats and Republicans about the nature of what the Russians were still doing. What's sort of the sense of the body of information that was put out to the public today?
It's important when you're at the Capitol to soak it in. And what I've found as a reporter is that as much as the world was watching Mr. Mueller today, lawmakers on both sides were more focused at times today on the budget deal and trying to get that out before taking a 5 to 6 week recess. You have a trade deal on the line with a North American version of the trade deal, the USMCA. So many more issues are out there that there's just not a lot of momentum to proceed among both parties, both chambers. They know they have to get other issues done. At the same time, this issue has been hovering over the Congress and the American political system for so long that they're at least trying to see how far can they go. If not impeachment, what next? And that's really going to be not just up to the presidential candidates and other Democratic leaders. It's up to Speaker Pelosi. And what she has to say in a few minutes will really determine what's next. All
right, we'll be watching. And if you come up with anything new in the next 15 minutes, jump back on with us. Robert Costa, it's a pleasure to have you on a day like today. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to ask you a weird question. Okay. It seems like once again, I mean, Robert Costa is saying that Senator Tester is saying, impeachment looks a little dicey. So Donald Trump benefits from the very low bar of being simply an unindicted co-conspirator, but still a criminal in a hush money scheme that the Southern District of New York prosecuted. Donald Trump benefits by being unchargeable in 10 counts of criminal obstruction of justice. And today it would appear it's possible Nancy Pelosi will come out and say that, well, he may very well have committed impeachable offenses. We don't have the will of our caucus there. So he constantly seems to benefit from, he's a criminal, but he's unindicted. He's accused of crimes by Robert Mueller, but he's bound by the OLC memo. I mean, he's a crook.
He certainly seems to live under a lucky star in some ways. I mean, he's a way of slipping out of these sort of traps. Yeah, he is. He has some Houdini-esque qualities to him. But I think that is right. The Democrats are in a bind. My reporting is exactly what Robert Costa's is in terms of what to do next. I think Speaker Pelosi has major decisions, and I think she's going to have real pushback from moderate forces in her party who don't want to proceed with impeachment, who will point today as like, look, we just don't have the goods. take that as you will, but they're going to say that. And obviously, this is a president now who is going to be taking an unending victory lap about what happened today. He's speaking now.
But he's much more, what's his name, Jim Traficant, than he is Barack Obama. He is not a president who, he's been under a cloud of scandal and criminality since before he was elected.
No question. But he does seem, there are a few of these scandals of controversy that have stayed with him, right? Certainly Charlottesville has, what we've seen on the border with the conditions in those cages, has Helsinki, perhaps a few others, but he does seem to evade a lot of others. And I think that he is going to be, I imagine, emboldened by what happened today, and that he is going to look very much pressure, and his allies and the Republican allies in Congress are going to pressure as well to turn the page. And they're going to appeal to the American public in this way. Say, look, this has been 2.5 years now. They've had their chance. Let's move forward. Now, whether the president can actually strike a bipartisan, good for the country tone here and say, look, let's move on. I know. I see your skepticism. I'm trying to keep a straight face here. The point being, that seems very unlikely because we know that he will gloat and gloat.
Can I have to say 3 things?
Please.
One, Jim Traficant. Incredible.
Not the guy in jail.
That's who he is. You have to be a total Congress dork to come up with a Jim Traficant thing.
I was trying to think of the biggest criminal
Number 2, I withdraw my criticism because apparently that question that I wanted to hear asked was asked and I missed it, barely taking a bathroom break when it was said. So I apologize to whatever Democratic congressman asked the question I wanted to hear. But number 3, let's not pretend Donald Trump is under some lucky star. He campaigned, he governed in a way for the first 2 years in office that led to a historic rout in the midterm elections. Yeah. The Helsinki, the border crisis, other examples of poor personal comportment, grotesque governance, cruelty. It drove voters away from him in droves in midterm elections. So he paid in the one place where in politics we keep score, at the election booth in the midterm elections, he suffered a wipeout, a historic drubbing of his party. And so I don't think that you can't yet make the claim that he lives under a lucky star. He has certainly been able, to your point, to evade up to this point paying prosecution or paying a direct price in terms of impeachment, the political equivalent of prosecution. That he has been lucky by the lowered standards. But these weights still pile up on him politically. It's not as though this stuff is not taking a toll. We will see in November of 2020. Right. But let's not pretend like this stuff is not taking a toll.
But I guess I want to ask you, it seems celebrating today. Celebrating what? That Robert Mueller said he can't be prosecuted because he's adhering to an OLC memo? The bar is so low. He won't be prosecuted criminally?
They live in enough of a bubble of delusion that he still thinks the midterms went pretty well for him. So what do you expect? Of course, they're looking at it and saying, I'm not going to get impeached, and they think he's still going to win re-election. So, again, they do look at the midterms and say he did historically well. So what are you going to say? That the deluded will be deluded?
Well, the midterms part of it is certainly not correct. The Republicans were wiped out across the board. But I think the White House, what they are saying right now is that there are so many ways this could have gone worse for them in terms of this investigation. There could have been charges. There could have been, we could have been bombshells today. There could be momentum towards impeachment. And that has not happened. And they're going to try to frame it. And we can certainly argue that it will be incorrect. But that they are already out there framing, saying, look, it is time to turn the page. It's time to move on.
This reminds me of one small point during the hearing that we haven't talked about when Mueller was asked, won't the statute of limitations run on these crimes? And he said, and I was surprised at this, I don't know. The answer is yes, they will run if he is reelected. Right. And as far as I know, there's no tolling mechanism. Judge Sugarman and some other experts have been writing about this lately. So that, to me, is one of the strongest cases of why the Democrats are really, he literally will be above the law if they do not start impeachment, because if he is reelected, he is not going to get charged with any of this.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.